Hello, Renata.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. I will disappear now, but I'm always here.
Okay, we start 9:30 sharp, right? The 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, see you then. Okay.
There may be no greater growing threat facing the world's children than climate change. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And welcome to the third day of the 10th edition of the International Advocacy Workshop held in hybrid format here in Mexico City at the campus of the Universidad Panamericana. My name is Claudia Orozco, Academic Coordinator for Family Sciences at the Universidad Anáhuac in Mexico City. It is an honor and privilege to me to moderate this event today. As you well know, today is the last day of our workshop, and we are excited to learn more about a topic that is so sensitive for our worlds and our families, climate change. We look forward to having a great discussion with speakers on the advocacy plan. Without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Renata Kakmarksa. She is the local point of the family at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs in New York. She will open the day with some welcoming remarks. Renata, you may open your microphone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for this introduction. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you. Good morning and perhaps good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank IFFD for organizing this workshop and for all its work on family well-being around the world. I also appreciate the long-term collaboration we had on family-oriented research and policy development. Our work at the UN focuses on exploring megatrends, as you know, and their impacts on families. And we try to offer recommendations on family-oriented policies to tackle their negative impacts and harness their positive effects. So the megatrends of new technologies, urbanization, migration, demographic change have been guiding our preparations. And of course, climate change is also a very important trend that we are still yet about to be explored. However, we already started exploring the interlinkages between all the mega trends. So we can sorry about that. So to be sure, all mega trends are interrelated. Demographic trends impact all other trends.
Sorry, Renata, we cannot hear you well. I don't know if your microphone.
I'm sorry. I was trying to reduce the noise of the computer emails, but
that's better there.
Okay, good. Okay. To be sure, demographic trends impact on all other trends. Increasing human activity is linked to climate change. Same goes for migration and displacement, as we have growing evidence that migration is becoming more and more climate-induced. So, for instance, according to the International Organization for Migration, there are an estimated 281 million international migrants and around 740 million internal migrants. In 2020 alone, 40 million internal displacements were new ones. And of those displacements, over 30 million, which is 76%, were triggered by weather-related disasters. So this indeed is a very worrying trend. So it's very timely to talk about climate change. The summer has been extremely hard in Europe. We have and US and other parts of the world. We had droughts, we had floods, and actually quite recently, the spokesperson for the UN just a few days ago, talking about the floods in Pakistan, noted that the areas most impacted by this unprecedented climate catastrophe are extremely large. 1/3 of the country has been underwater. The flood killed over 1,000 people, impacted 33 million. So it is really timely, very timely to talk about climate change, and I think the trends are really accelerating. And it's not only the large-scale events like storms, tsunamis, floods, there are also slower onset changes in climate change like droughts, which actually increase the likelihood of migration much more than natural disasters. So it is families that depend on the land and try to adapt and stay in place as long as possible, and as a result remain in high-risk areas, becoming vulnerable when disaster strikes. Here, climate change disproportionately affects rural and indigenous families. In a recent report, the scientists said that chances of climate catastrophe are ignored and not enough preparations are being made to face their consequences. And some of the worst possible climate change catastrophic scenarios are not under scrutiny. Such scenarios may include collapse of society and the potential even extinction of humans. Some of the scientists around the world have been calling on the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the world's authoritative climate change science organization, to add a special science report on catastrophic climate change to bring into focus how much is at stake in a worst-case scenario. So, in their perspective, they raise the issues that are avoided by scientific and community and policymakers. So basically, good risk analysis consider both what's most likely and what's the worst that could happen. But because of pushback from non-scientists who reject climate change, mainstream climate science has concentrated on looking at what's most likely and also disproportionately on low temperature warming scenarios that come close to international goals. However, there is not enough emphasis on how things, the big risk, could go plausibly very wrong. So when global science organizations look at climate change, they tend to just look at what happens in the world with extreme weather, high temperatures, melting ice sheets, rising seas, and plant and animal extinction. But they aren't factoring enough how these reverberate in human societies and interact with existing problems like war, hunger, and disease. So if we don't look at this intersecting risk, we may be painfully surprised. And as you could see with COVID-19, well, I think it's a good example where it was a mistake health professionals made before COVID-19 when assessing possible pandemics. They talked about disease spread, right? But no one really was prepared for lockdowns, supply chain problems, and spiraling economies or increase in crime and violence as well. So these scenarios have not been thought about, and the societies were not prepared to tackle this additional problems that COVID-19 brought about. So moving on to some recent initiatives of the United Nations, I would like to speak a little bit about what UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said recently, last month actually, about climate change and giving some warnings and giving some recommendations. So the Secretary General recently noted that household budgets everywhere are feeling the pinch from high food, transport, and energy prices fueled by climate breakdown and war. And this threatens a starvation crisis for the poorest household and severe cutbacks for those on average incomes. And we are already seeing the warning signs of a wave of economic, social, and political upheaval that could leave no country untouched. So the Secretary General has established the Global Crisis Response Group to find coordinated global solutions to this triple crisis, recognizing these three elements: food, energy, and finance, that are deeply interconnected and, of course, relate to climate change. So let me mention some of the recommendations relating to climate change that Secretary General mentioned. So first, it is immoral for oil and gas companies to be making record profits from this energy crisis on the backs of the poorest people and communities and at a massive cost to the climate. The Secretary General urges all governments to tax these excessive profits and use the funds to support the most vulnerable people through these difficult times. Second, all countries, and especially developing countries, must manage energy demand. Conserving energy, promoting public transport, nature-based solutions are essential components of that. Third, we need to accelerate the transition to renewables, which in most cases are cheaper than fossil fuels. Storage technologies, including batteries, should become public goods. Governments must scale up and diversify supply chains for raw materials and renewable energy technologies. Governments must also support the people, communities, and sectors most affected with social protection schemes and alternative jobs and livelihoods. And fourth, private and multilateral finance for the green energy transition must be scaled up. I believe that these recommendations have to be taken on board by governments, private sector, civil society, and families around the world if we are to avert severe climate change consequences. Thank you for raising awareness of climate change, its impact on families, and finding solutions for sustainable future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Renata. I think this is very important to understand the relationship between family and climate change and how we can and we should do something now. I don't know if there are some questions in the audience or here in Zoom for Renata. Cohen Vermeij, please open your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. I was wondering, since we're making an advocacy plan today, and the advocacy plan, the goal of it is to be as inclusive as possible so that it can be applied all across the world. But the problem with that is that it becomes so abstract that sometimes I have the idea, or I have to question what the direct effect of such big projects actually is. Could you tell me something about that, since you work in the United Nations with it, which is a very high positioned organization in the hierarchy?
Yeah, definitely. So as you know, United Nations is an intergovernmental organization. So our goal is really to give recommendations. First of all, raise awareness of the issues that are important, that face us all. And then focus on specific issues that are most important, and then mobilize governments to do something about it. So, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for example, has been talking for years and years about the risks of climate change, right? They have been recommendations for years about that, but it's really up to the governments to listen to those recommendations and implement them. So basically, I mean, of course, you have those big summits, right? You have the big summits that come up with recommendations or guidelines or plans of actions, but it's really up to the governments, right, to implement them. So now we paint the big picture. We paint the big picture. We give the recommendations. We also give some good practices. There's a lot of good practices that are shared on the UN website. So we give examples of what can be done. But ultimately, it's really up to governments, right? So, but governments are elected, right? So it's really up to the people to elect the governments they want to have, right? So parties that support, climate change efforts, green parties, it's up to the electorate to choose those parties to be represented and to fight for climate change. There are also many movements that people can join for environmental justice, for example, to involve more women in decision making. For example, it's mostly women who are actually rural workers who really see the effects of climate change, for their land. So we need really participatory approach where all people are involved, and really it's people who have to demand action on the part of governments. And I think civil society has an important role in this because it can unite people together on specific cause, raise awareness, and then do advocacy within communities, within local government, and then take it higher to a national level. So it's all related. Ultimately, we work from the top level, but it's really up to you to help. And like hopefully this workshop as well is important for advocacy efforts, and you can take it to your local governments with the results, with the whatever recommendations you adopt. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Renata. And I'm sorry I didn't ask Cohen to introduce himself. Could you please tell us who you are and what do you do?
Oh, I'm a student here in the Netherlands. I study European law, and I'm the coordinator of the advocacy plan today. So it's especially relevant for me to have some goal in mind when drafting the document. So thank you very much for the answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Cohen. And there's another question here in Zoom. Victor Molnar, please open your microphone and your camera, introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Victor Molnar. I'm a volunteer at NOE from Hungary, and I would like to ask you if you have any good example of second or third world countries where they rely on non-green solutions for their economy. So, for example, factories, oil production, or gas usage. So that's what the main economy is all about. Is there any good example where the government realized that this is really bad for the climate change and try to actually go for a greener path that we could use for this advocacy plan as an example?
Okay. In case of developing countries, I know that there are quite good policies in China. Well, which this is probably the benefit of having a centralized government that can actually impose laws that help the environment. So, and also give subsidies to companies that are green. I am familiar with what's happening in the US with the bills for green energy companies. So that was recently introduced to the Congress and was adopted as a bipartisan initiative. And this bill also supports green companies. So I think like the combination of tax incentives, right, for the companies that develop new technologies is very important. And it really leads from government, that leads to innovation from the private sector. And for example, the companies that support storage, as the Secretary General mentioned, the storage solutions for energy, this is really important, the batteries, right? Development of batteries, the hydrogen fuel technology. This is by the way, this is an invention that has been in existence for a long time. So we could have clean energy source just by using hydrogen. Now, the implementation of that takes a long time because, in the meantime, you have all these interests supporting oil and gas, right? So the money goes there. But if the government supported development of this technology, we could, we could already have, if that happened, let's say 20, 30 years ago, the support, we already could have, more green energy sources from the government. So, there are examples, I would say, kind of small scale examples around the world, but I really think what's most important is legislation supporting the green energy, because that's the beginning of having sustainable energy solutions. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renata. Are there any further questions here in Zoom or in the room? There you go. Please come here to take the microphone. Introduce yourself and ask the question.
Hello, my name is Victoria Favila. I'm a marketer here in Universidad Panamericana, and I'm also a social entrepreneurship. Thanks for the talk. I have a question for you, and it's, would there be any way to use these new technologies that are currently being implemented, such as NFTs or blockchain technology, to help to reduce the energy used by the same technologies, or help another industry to reduce the energy consumption?
Okay, thank you. Well, this is a very technical question. To be honest, I don't know. I only know that it's really the blockchain, and all this mining takes a lot of energy. And of course, electricity electricity, has to be produced, right? And not necessarily does it comes from green sources. So energy consumption with the blockchain technologies is problematic, in my opinion. It is. So unless we find, we have green sources for electricity supply in general, right? Then we can address, the blockchain energy consumption in a more sustainable ways. As an example, in New York, we have an option to have all the energy supplied from renewable sources, right? So it's really up to the consumer. So maybe I feel less, guilty when I use electricity. Try not to overuse, but because it comes from green sources. So I think probably in your countries you have these options as well. So in this way, we can support the green energy providers. Just look at your electricity bill and see where it comes from, where the energy comes from. If you can switch to green sources, then do it. Even if it's a slightly higher cost, I think you feel better, that your electricity comes from green sources. So that's maybe halfway satisfying answer. But I hope you look at your electricity bills more carefully.
Thank you very much, Renata. I don't know if there are further questions. We have 10 minutes left for the next activity. Well, I myself would like to ask, I know that this is a very important problem to address, and children may pay for it in the future. There are two different kinds of actions that we should take, like the macro actions, as you said, in the laws, to change everything in the laws, and also the micro ones, the ones that we do within our families. I don't know if you could just tell us like some tips we could do within our families in order for these to be real in our context.
Yes. So if I understand correctly, how to help with the conservation efforts, recycling, all that, right? Within families. Yes. So this is really important. I think first of all, in the family, we are the educators, right? The families are the educators of the next generation. So basically, just educating children about, all the possibilities for recycling, for conserving resources like water, electricity. This is the first step. Then I think volunteering in the community for green projects is very important. Some schools have this. In the US, it's called community service, where you can help. You can choose a project that's environmentally sustainable project, right? So that's already cooperation between schools and parents. So schools demand that, but the parent can help to choose the project the children can be involved with, that they can learn more about sustainability, help, in a park, for example, in gardens, or help with water conservation projects. So that family can encourage, and of course, you can make small steps that produce big results. For example, we stopped buying plastic bottles years ago. I think this is something that it's really it's a problem that triggers me personally when I see people drinking from plastic bottles. The water in it's not better. Usually it's from municipal sources, and it's the same as tap water, right? So plus, if you have particles, if you get plastic bottles, you get particles of plastic in the water. So it's really unhealthy to consume this kind of water. So there are purification systems, you can install in your faucet. or sometimes it's not even needed. It's a good quality water, and drink that water. Don't buy plastic waters. This is plastic bottles. This is a huge problem, really. It pollutes the oceans, pollutes most of these plastic waters are not being recycled. So don't kid yourself that if you put the plastic bottle in the receptacle, it says, for recycling. Don't kid yourself that it will be recycled. So this is really one small step, but think about it. Like if we were not buying all this plastic, how much less pollution we would have. So steps like that, I think, really any family can do. Again, look at your electricity bill, see where the power comes from. Even recycling clothes. Like I know in large families, a lot of recycling goes on. The children reuse the clothes. This is also one industry that uses a lot of resources to produce clothes. So again, this is another area families can be aware of. So these are some of the practical solutions families can take on board.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Renata. I think that we as parents should be the first ones to try to make a change, so we can teach our children how to tackle this problem. Well, I think there are no further questions. I really thank you, Renata, for your participation here in this third day of a Congress. And I guess we have 10 minutes of break now, and we'll be back at 9:07. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, here I am. Video should be okay. Sound okay. Please tell me if it's fine.
How you doing, Emmanuel? Yeah,
Hi.
I can hear you.
Okay. Should I go closer to the microphone or is it fine?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So we can wait till for like 6 minutes, and we'll connect back to you. Okay.
Yes. Should I show the presentation with the screen sharing, or will you show it?
As you prefer.
I can do screen sharing. I think it's fine. So
okay, perfect. I'm gonna make you co-host, so you have the privileges to share screen.
Okay. I try it now so we can check if if it's fine, because I've not a huge bandwidth here. Okay, so let's start with this. Is it fine? Okay. Oh, is it going?
Yep, perfect. I can see the third slide.
Okay, great. So I'll show it.
Okay.
Okay,
Perfect.
well then, thank you. Tell me, I'll shut the sound off and tell me my microphone off and tell me when I have to start
Exactly.
the
I'm going to share
presentation.
now one of the advocacy plans that we're working on for today. So I'm just going to take over sharing screen.
Okay, sure.
Okay, criminal. Thank you.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Thank you very much. We are going to come back now, moving on to the last lecture of the workshop. That is called Should We Stop Having Children to Save the Planet? I would like to introduce Emmanuel Pon from France, researcher on the relations among ecology, science, and politics, blogger, and author of a best-selling book. Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. Thank you for having me and inviting me for this presentation. So I'm going to talk about this very thorny and tricky question: should we stop having children to save the planet? So a few words about me. I'm an engineer. I've been studying this topic for at least 3 years, since I've written an article about the question of population and climate change. The first version was in 2019, and there is an English version now. And since then, I have written a book in French that goes into much more details, and I will probably continue with a PhD on the question of the links between population growth, the ecological crisis, and so on. So I start with the first question, which is about human population growth. Is it an exploding bomb? So you probably heard of this book, which has been a bestseller in 1968, called The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich. And the thesis of this book is that our population is growing uncontrollably, and that soon people will starve, population would crash, and the environment would be totally destroyed. So you've seen that none of these things actually happened, but we still have an ecological crisis, and population, of course, is a question. So when you look at the human population numbers since the beginning of history, it actually looks like a bomb. Where will it stop? Of course, it's frightening, but when you zoom on this picture, actually, you realize that the population growth is already flattening, that the growth rate is decreasing since its maximum in 1968, the year of the population bomb, and that the human population should peak around, well, let's say between 10 and 11 billion, and between 2050 and 2100. No one has a crystal ball about where population is going, but we still have great the big trends. And the big trend is that gross fertility rates are decreasing everywhere in the world. So at some point, human population will stop growing. This does not mean that there isn't any question, and especially maybe that even if human population will probably stabilize, we may be too many. So too many, but too many for what? The first question, which was a question from the population bomb, but also from a lot of the literature and the pop culture from this time, for example, Soylent Green. Soylent Green is a sci-fi movie happening in our year where people are starving, and at some point they may have to eat other people. And it's really a symbol of this time where people were frightened that we would be too many and we couldn't feed everyone. So can we feed 10 or 11 billion people that we will very probably reach? Actually, there are dozens of studies about how to reach it. And the main things to do are first, eat less meat, because actually a lot of meat is a lot of cereals and other plant products are eaten currently by animals. For example, we have a grain crisis, but around half of the world's cereal production goes to feed. And the other big item is reduce waste. Humanity wastes about 1/3 of every food it produces. So actually, even today, there is far enough food to feed everyone. It's a political question, and who can afford it. Let's go further to the climate question. So when you split the people emissions from the consumptions, you realize that about half of emissions are from the richest 10% of population. So actually, how many people there are, and actually what is the population growth among poor people in the world, because actually this is where population is still growing, doesn't really matter. It's not the big question. The big question is, what are these 10% richest people doing? And how would they decarbonize their lifestyles, their society, their politics? And it's one of the big traps from about this debate, because almost every article, even well-meaning articles that you will see, are showing Indian, African women, and so on. And actually, the ecological question is mostly about white people. So even with these numbers, would reducing human population be ecologically useful, especially in rich countries where most of the pollution is? So I asked myself a question: what would happen if we would institute the one-child policy in France? So tomorrow, people can only have one child. And there are actually very different ways to set it, because the one-child policy in China was actually between 1.5 and 2.5 children per woman. And it will really depend about how it's done, what are the exceptions, can people pay the fine, and so on. So I drew a few scenarios. France currently has a fertility rate about 1.9 children per woman, and having a very soft one-child policy would reduce it to 1.6, and the harsh policy would reduce it to 1.1. And so this is the population. What will happen? So it's not counting immigration, but only natural birth. And you see that actually you have to wait 2100, the end of the century, to divide the population by 2. So it's the first thing that it's very important when you speak about population measures, demographics, is that the momentum is huge. It really takes a lot of time to change the direction of the population. But there are more momentums. There is another one. It's that babies have actually low emissions. Adults consume a lot, children not that much. So we have the black curve about what are the current emissions by age. And then in the future, these emissions will probably go down. So at what rhythm? We have two curves. The first one, the upper one, the dark blue one, is if emissions degrow slowly, the current rate about minus 10% per year. And the light one is if they are decreased fast, which is the Paris objective to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So actually, when you see these curves, you realize that the impact is much slower. It's much lower in the long term because emissions will be lower. So what happens with warming? What really determines global warming is not the emissions by year, it's cumulative emissions. It's how much you add, how much CO2 you add in the long run. And if you reduce population, it will actually take some time to have this effect in cumulative emissions. So you realize that actually when you institute the one-child policy, the long-term effect in 2100 is actually very small, because emissions by person have decreased a lot by that time. So this effect is even lower than we could think. So it's really not a silver bullet. Even something that's harsh and anti-freedom and anti-fundamental rights as the one-child policy would only reduce cumulative emissions by a few %. And there are deeper questions with this reasoning, with this calculation. We are used to formulas like Kaya or IPAT equation. You probably heard if you studied environment, and where population is supposed to be a multiplicative factor. And this means that if we would be like half the world population, we would have half the population, half the pollution. And this is what happens in the Avengers movie when the bad guy decides to divide the population by 2. And we are supposed to believe that it would solve the ecological crisis. There are actually many weaknesses with this reasoning, because even if we were half the population, we would have to decarbonize most of our society. If we were half the population, would already half of the oil wells coal mine would close? Would states choose to respect their climate pledges? Not like now. Would lobbies stop promoting destructive policies? Would the culture of consumerism disappear? Nothing at all. So actually, it's really a very poor fix to our problems, and probably things would continue like before, and we would just win a bit of time. And we will finish by the individual question, because in the first part of the presentation, we were thinking about the society, humanity, and so on. As an individual, should you have children? You probably read this kind of headlines where having a child is presented as the worst thing you can do for the environment. This all comes from a study for 2017 that calculates the CO2 impact of having a child, and which comes up with a suspiciously large number. So this around 60 tons of CO2. 60 tons of CO2, it's like the carbon footprint of 6 people. So how can having one child have the carbon footprint of 6 people? It's very weird, or it's very questionable. The authors chose to count every emissions of your child, their offspring, and for the end of the world. So this asks a lot of questions. The first one is that it's really not like stopping a car, going vegetarian, and not taking a plane, and so on, because these things are calculated by engineers. These are life cycle analysis, and they are actual numbers that are measured and that correspond to short-term emissions. This carbon heritage, that is the 60 ton, is hypothetical emissions in the very far future. So it's really not the same thing at all. And it's, I would say, dishonest to compare the two. But there are more issues. They have to take hypotheses about what would be the future emissions and what would be the future fertility. The scenarios with emissions is that the CO2 emissions by person would be stable until the end of time. Of course, it's not possible. We have limited quantities of fossil fuels, and the planet would have some issues in this case. And with the fertility, they choose to continue the fertility rates that were projected by the United Nations for the end of the century, but project them until the end of time, which would mean that humanity would go extinct because of lack of babies. So of course, it makes no sense at all either. And if they didn't do this, the number would be infinite, because when you sum emissions and humanity doesn't go extinct, it gives an infinite number. There are several other issues, more philosophical. because when you compare consumer choices for having a child, it's really not the same thing. One is a fundamental right, and the other is not. The other is a consumption choice. And finally, it raises question about what is responsibility. Are you really responsible for your great children's future pollution? I don't think so, and I don't think it's really a good thing to calculate and consider this. So the author of this study was actually interviewed last year, and she made a turnaround and say that actually it's okay to have kids because this number is a very theoretical calculation, which doesn't mean much. And actually the big questions are, if you have a child, how will he live and in what society? And I think it's a great conclusion for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for your words, for everything that you have done in order for people to know that this is a very tricky question. I don't know if there are any questions either in the room or in Zoom. Remember that we have this valuable time to ask the speakers some questions so they can talk a little bit more about their subject. We have some time to do that. Seize the time. Go ahead. Please come here, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Ana Bolio. I'm here from the Universidad Panamericana in Mexico, and I work at the World Youth Alliance. My question is that if these antenatal policies or propaganda are targeted to vulnerable groups.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I think there are two targets. Effectively, sometimes it's to vulnerable groups, but it's mostly, I would say, feel-good propaganda for Western and richer people who would prefer to believe that the problem is children in further parts of the world and not their own consumptions or their own part in capitalist society and so on. And I'm not sure currently there isn't that much coercive policies, but it's been something that's been very strong in the 70s and 80s, and especially inspired by the likes of Paul Ehrlich, and where rich countries would blackmail poorer countries and say, we wouldn't help you if you don't control your birth rights. And there have been tons of abuse in many countries, and many of them were inspired by richer countries who would say, we are tough to their own electors and so on.
Thank you very much.
There's another question here in Zoom. We have two questions. I encourage you to ask more while these three questions now are going on. So first, Kun, please open your microphone and your camera.
Hello, Emmanuel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. This is more of an existential or general question. I'm 26 years old, and people around me are starting to think about having children. And I know several that say, I would like to have children, but I'm too afraid to have them and put them into a world that is slowly falling apart. What would you say about that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a great question. And actually, I think like 70% of our generation are asking similar kinds of questions. And what I can say is that we don't have any crystal ball and that the future is not set. And actually, even if the ecological future was set, how it really happens is a political choice. The question of hunger, I think it's great here, Famines are political issues. There have always been enough, most of the time, been enough to eat, and it's just a question and who can afford it. And the ecological crisis will happen like this. Some people will adapt easily because they have the means, they have the culture, they are in the right place in the world. Some people will not. And the big question is how humanity will choose to react, we choose to share the burden, we choose to help each other, and so on. And this is something where the future is not set, where everything can still happen. And this is also really converging with the question of reducing emissions and reducing pollution in the first place, because it's a collaboration issue. So my message is that I'm not sure that our future is worse than what our children, what our parents, our grandparents were fearing, but like the Third World War, the nuclear apocalypse, and so on, which are still risks nowadays. And we are adults. We have some kind of power and ways to influence the world. We can decide collectively what this world would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We encourage you to have children. August Weber, please open your microphone and your video, introduce yourself, and feel free to ask the question.
Hello, my name is August Weber. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a alumni student of the UvA of Amsterdam. Last year, I did some research on the limits to growth. Today, it's like of this year, it's 50 years ago that this report came out. It's a report, the first important report of the Club of Rome. Club of Rome started with spreading the message that we should do something about our climate. And they also wrote about the impact of population growth on the climate. And my question to you is, what do you think the impact of the report, the limits to growth, had on the idea that population growth is bad for the climate?
Thank you. So just to be a bit more precise, the limits to growth is not really about the climate. It's more generally about resources and pollution in a more general sense. And I think it's something that we have to understand, is that it's a very general model. And it's not like demographic projection. It's not a crystal ball, but it gives an idea of how some mechanism may happen. And I think the authors were clearer in the past about this, but they really said it gives an idea of some risks, but it's not a prediction. And actually, when things start to get tougher and limits that to be reached and so on, the model doesn't stay right because rules will change. And so the way that things collapse in the limits to growth model is things collapse if nothing changes. And of course, actually, life, human history is a very long collection of things changing, of things not being everything else equal, and so on. About the links between the limits to growth and overpopulation fears, I think the authors are a bit, they are not very clear, and they are the children of their time, where this was a very common fear. And they actually did a calculation in their book where they choose that all the humanity goes to 2.1 child by woman instantly. And it actually doesn't change much. I think it delays collapse by 2 or 3 years. And so it's a very minor parameter. And at the same time, they have this discourse that population growth is very important, it's a risk and so on. And I don't think it's warranted by their reasons. And there are some sentences that really disturb me, like if population growth is slower, it's still exponential, but it's still growing, but the coefficient is smaller, and it's not exponential if the coefficient goes smaller. And they are mathematicians; they should know it. And really, it's not the best the best part of the report.
Yes, but also the effect on newspapers, at least in the Netherlands, was that there was like a doom scenario created, and everyone started to have less children, because if you had more children, you were looked as egoistic people, and yeah, it was, the effect was very hard, although maybe they didn't want this kind of doom scenario to be spread all over the world, but the effect was enormous.
It's something I look up, because as far as I know, there wasn't any baby crash when any of these books were published, because actually, even if they were bestsellers, the Population Bomb or The Limits to Growth, they didn't reach enough people to be seen in birth rates. So I'll have a look. Maybe it's in the Netherlands, because globally in the world or in France or in the US, it doesn't show. But thank you. I'll see into it.
Thank you very much for your question, August. Evelyn, please open your microphone and camera, introduce yourself, and feel free to ask your question.
I want only one thing to add, because it was put in every newspaper, it reached far more people than the many books that were sold, of course.
Thank you, August. Now it's your turn, Evelyn.
Hi, my name is Evelyn from Kenya, but unfortunately I can't turn on my camera because I lose connection. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So my question is, so we have seen policies and solutions to the issue of climate change being made, but in the technological advancement era that we are in, do you think that these policies and solutions are actually working at a personal level or family level? Because I can give an example of here in Africa, where families want to upgrade their homes from, example, buying TVs, fridge, etc. And because the concept of moving from a developing country to a developed country actually includes technological advancement. So do you think these policies are working at a family level and at a personal level?
I think there are two questions, and I tried to answer both. First, if we think that everyone in the world has the right to similar standards of living, poor countries and Africa globally should develop. They should be richer, they should have more TVs, and richer countries should leave them some room to pollute more. And it's something that has to be accepted. We shouldn't, the poorer people of the world shouldn't bear the burden of decarbonization, and it's not their fault, it's not their responsibility, and they have the right to a better life. The second question is the link between, I would say, individual or family level policies and general policies. I'm very skeptical, actually, of individual questions or individual consumption reductions, because in a world that doesn't do much collectively to reduce emissions and to reduce pollutions, the pollution that you do not emit will mostly be done by someone else. And this is something that is really obvious in the rebound effect. The rebound effect is when you have something that is more efficient, you will save money and you will maybe use this thing a bit more and save money that you will use on something else. In the end, between 75% and under 100% of your energy or pollution savings will be catched by the rebound effect and done elsewhere. So if any limited or any small scale efforts usually swamped or catched by other changes. And so we have at national or international levels decide bigger policies, bigger scale policies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Now it's turn for Peter Chijak. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Open your microphone, introduce yourself, and please feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am Peter Chijioke Ani from Nigeria. I have a very simple question, and the question is, what can family do to slow down the process of climate change? What can family do to slow down the process of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you. As individuals and as families, I think the best thing we can do is to engage politically, or in syndicates, or in associations, and on things that have a bigger impact than just your own consumption. So of course, eating less meat is good. Using an electric car is good. Stopping flying is good, and so on. These are the big ticket items when you reduce your personal footprint. But it's always more important, and it has to go together, to engage in social change.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now it's turn of Victor Molnar. Can you please open your microphone and camera, introduce yourself, and ask a question, please?
Hello, I'm Victor Molnar. I'm a volunteer at NOE, and I would like to ask you, you mentioned this idea of more developed countries offering financial support to developing countries if they actually lower their population, or at least the children that they are having. My question is, what if the government actually decides to take this, but then how would they enforce it in a way? Because I know in Hungary there are a heavy culture in various culture groups that put heavy emphasis on having a big family, and how would the government actually do anything about changing their cultural view of no, don't have 5 kids, don't have 6 kids, because these families usually have their children as a second policy, as a backup plan in case they don't have anywhere else to go when they are older. This is their retirement plan, that when they cannot go and work, they can move in with their kids. And if they only have 1 kid, there is a risk that if something happens with that kid, then they are left alone, because they maybe don't have enough when they go to retirement, and they don't have anyone else to look after them. So how would the government actually help to incite these people to don't have this backup plan in case something goes wrong in their life?
Thank you. I think the simplest answer would be to simply offer public pension plans, so that people have pensions or healthcare and so on, whether they have children or not. And it's one of the many ways that fertility rates go down in the world. So there is this phenomenon that we call the demographic transition, is that when the mortality is high, people have many children, and then mortality goes down, and it takes some time for the fertility to go down after that. And there are tons of other mechanisms that are cultural, that are economic, that are social security, that are about politics, that are about freedom of, especially of women to choose, that are about education and opportunities. And all of this help to reduce fertility rates when, and only in this case, people want to actually have less children. And it can be a very long phenomenon. Like in Europe, it took around 200 years for fertility rates to go down around two children by a woman. It can be pretty fast. In Iran, for example, it took 20 years because it was a rather rich country with good education, good healthcare systems, with a strong political and religious power, and so on. So when nothing of these tools are useful, the only thing left is coercion, which could be fines when you have more children, which can be preference for some government jobs, and so on. Everything of this is currently happening, for example, in India. If you look for what's Uttar Pradesh, the government of Uttar Pradesh has chosen several measures to discourage people for having too many children. And of course, it applies to minorities more, and it always causes issues.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Victor. And there's another question from Georges Mani. Please open your microphone, your camera, introduce yourself, and feel free to ask the question.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is George Mani from Cameroon. Emmanuel, thank you for your presentation. Very tough topic. And my question is looking at the young generation here in Africa. They are very well concerned about this question of children, more concerned than the fathers and the grandparents who are not involved in this because you know how baby boom in Africa is. But do you think today, what could be the best advice to give to this young generation? Do you listen to what is going on in the world and the concern of children, baby boom not the baby boom, but the question of children in the occidental part of the world? Or do you follow the step of your father, your grandfather, and continue to have a lot of children in your family? So what will be the best advice for this young generation today?
Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert about African culture and what are currently the debates and so on. One of the great questions about Africa currently is that the demographic transition is going slow because Africa is not developing fast enough for many reasons, and where, of course, rich countries have quite a strong part. So my advice for children who will hear this is really make your own choices. And I don't think we have to impose cultural norms and so on, and that people will have their own norms evolve if it fits their society, if it fits their wishes and all their countries are evolving. So I'm not the best person to give advice about how many children you should have and what you should believe. And I think it's something really important in this debate is that children and people more generally are ends, not means. So if you can live in a world where you see people as ends because you're not constrained by economical issues or having a pension or having someone to help you work, treat your children as means and do what you think would be best for them. Your actual children or potential children.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you.
As ends, of course, I would say.
Sure.
Treat your children as ends, not means.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, George. Are there any other questions here in the room? We do not have more questions in Zoom. I myself have another question. It's like every country has a particular experience, but there's a general idea of youngsters to effectively not to have children nor families. Not only for climate change reasons, but for other more. The question is, what is the main idea that we should change in this generation so we can encourage them to have more families, Emmanuel?
I'm still not sure we should encourage people to have more families. I think we should encourage them to be free and make their own choices. and if this is have more children. And actually, in rich countries or in low fertility countries globally, people have less children than they would wish, and mostly for social and economic reasons. And in high fertility countries, people have more children than they would wish because of the lack of contraception or cultural norms and so on. And we should mostly try to help people achieve their wishes about how many children they would like, and help the children live in the best world they can live in.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that answer, Emmanuel. Thanks for this interactive discussion. Now we will have a short break before our next speaker. That is 15-minute break. So we'll be back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
To write and to collaborate in the advocacy plan that is in the web, in the chat, Zoom chat, and here I don't know if we can put the QR. So
Eleanor Rigby died in the church and was buried along with must have known that I was lonely, because you came to my rescue. And I know that this must be heaven. How could so much love be inside of you? You are the sunshine of my life, baby. Forever you stay in my heart. I feel like this is the beginning. Though I loved you for a million years, and if I thought our love was ending, I'd find myself drowning in my own tears. You are the sunshine of my life. I see you, you see me. Watch you blow in the lines when you're making a scene. Oh, girl, you gotta know what my head overlooks, what senses will show to my heart. When it's watching for lies, you can't escape my private eyes. They're watching you. They see your every move. Private eyes are watching you. Private eyes, they're watching you, watching you, watching you. You play with words, you play with love. You can twist it around, baby, that ain't enough. 'Cause girl, I gotta know if you're letting me in or letting me go. Don't lie. When you're hurting inside, you can't escape my private eyes. The one to set the night on fire. The time to hesitate you through. No time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose. And our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. The time to hesitate you through. No time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose. And our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I were to say to you, girl, it couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. Try to set the night on fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my
Blue moon, you saw me standing alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own. Blue moon, you knew just what I was there for. You heard me saying a prayer for someone I really should care for. And then there suddenly appeared before me the only one my arms would ever hold. I heard somebody whisper, please adore me. And when I looked, the moon had turned to gold. Blue moon, I am no longer alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own.
Thank you very much. We are coming back. We usually learn the basics in our families and through the example of our parents and siblings. Connecting from the US and sharing a great invite on how can we help families to be more climate conscious, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Bechard, author and senior policy analyst at Moms Clean Air Force. This is a participation that we have in video. So if you have any questions, Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to ask them to like directly in this moment to Elizabeth, but we can always send her a mail. You can find the mail in our site. And if you have any questions, please write it down so we can ask them later on. Go ahead with the video.
Excited to be with you today for this International Advocacy Workshop and to share out how to help families become more climate conscious. I'll start by briefly introducing myself. Again, my name is Elizabeth Béchard. I am a coach. I am the author of Parenting in a Changing Climate. I'm a senior policy analyst with Mom's Clean Air Force, and I am the mom of 6-year-old twins, Milo and Minnie. My contact information is here if you want to reach out to me. I hope you will. I want to dive in with sharing some of my own climate story. I've always been someone who was environmentally conscious. I tried to do the right thing in terms of things like recycling and just paying attention to what was happening to the planet. But the reality of climate change didn't fully land for me until 2018, when my twins were 2 years old. And I remember reading the headlines about the report that came out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that year. And this headline that you see on the right side of your screen that said we have 12 years left to limit climate change catastrophe really left me breathless. I remember having this intense climate anxiety and thinking, oh my gosh, my kids are 2 years old. Like I don't have the ability to put this off until they're older. I have to figure out how to be a climate activist during their childhood, right? Because these 12 years are the years that they are going to grow up. And yet they're also the years that are going to determine the quality of their future. So I was experiencing intense climate anxiety because of what I was hearing in the news. Maybe some of you remember seeing these headlines that year. And of course, the headlines keep coming. Around the same time, just weeks before the IPCC report came out, Hurricane Florence hit North Carolina, where we live. And this picture you see on the left hand of the screen is my twins in Wilmington, North Carolina, at a beach in Wilmington, which was where my grandmother grew up and lived all of her life, where my mother grew up and lived for a long time. So it was a beloved place for us. And it got hit really hard just weeks after this picture was taken by Hurricane Florence. And that was just weeks before these headlines about the IPCC report. So for me, that season was really marked by intense worry about what was to come in the future about climate change, but also really realizing that climate change is here now. And we're feeling the impacts all over the world. And so I'm imagining that many of you have felt impacts like hurricanes, like wildfires or heat waves. Much of the world has been experiencing heat waves this past summer, droughts. And so families all around the world are having these moments of waking up both to the very present reality of climate change, but also worrying about what it means for the future. And so what does climate change mean for families? This quote from the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change really landed with me. And in 2019, the Lancet reported that the life of every child born today will be profoundly affected by climate change. This is a graphic from the report that highlights just some of the ways that climate change impacts children's health. And you can see the impact of climate change on our kids begins before they're even born now, right? So things like heat waves and air pollution can affect pregnancy outcomes before children are even born, causing outcomes like low birth weight, preterm birth that can affect kids for the rest of their lives. Children are more vulnerable to heat-related illnesses because their bodies don't regulate temperature as well as adult bodies do. And when disasters strike, children are among the most vulnerable. And it's really important too that this graphic highlights the impact of climate change on teens and adolescents. Of course, they're also vulnerable to the health impacts, but the mental health impacts are significant and growing. And it includes things like the acute stress of being in a natural disaster, such as a wildfire evacuation or a hurricane, but also the anxiety about what may be to come. And this is a graphic showing the results of a survey of 10,000 young people. This was also published in the Lancet last year in 2021. It was a survey of 10,000 young people ages 16 to 25 around the world, asking them about how they felt about climate change. And the survey found overwhelming levels of distress among young people about climate change. As you can see here, a majority of them felt emotions like sadness and fear and anxiety, and extremely worried, right? About a third of young people in this study were extremely worried about climate change. And as any parent who has had a child with a physical health challenge or a mental health challenge knows that, you know, when our children are struggling, it's an issue for a whole family. So young people's mental health is a family issue too. And parents are worried as well. You know, unfortunately, we don't yet have the same sort of large database asking parents about how they feel about climate change. But this graphic is from a survey of Chicago parents that was done pretty recently, asking them about their feelings about climate change. And you can see here about a third of Chicago parents who were surveyed feel a great deal of concern about climate change and are very worried that, that their family members, such as their children, might be affected by climate change in the future. This is a graphic from that same survey that was done that shows that the more parents understood about climate change, the more worried they were. And this tracks with my own experience, that the more I've learned about climate change, the more worry and concern that I felt. And so this is really important to keep in mind when we're thinking about how we help families become more climate conscious. We need to think about the impact that learning more about climate change might have on their mental health as well. And so what does it mean to be more climate conscious? So I want to underline that there is definitely no single or best definition of what it means to be climate conscious. You know, what it means to be climate conscious has a lot to do with where you are in the world and the level of privilege that you have. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But for me, just so that we have a working definition of this for the workshop, being climate conscious means making choices with the health of the planet and future generations in mind. And this is a graphic that some of you might have seen. It's from Earth Overshoot Day, which is a website you can visit that shows, you know, that the date at which if everyone in the world lived like the people of individual countries, that the world would run out of resources. It's a really striking graphic. I live in the United States. Our Earth Overshoot Day is March 13th, which is barely a third of the way through the year. And so what it means to be climate conscious, if you're, you know, in a country where the Earth Overshoot Day is somewhere in the early spring, might look very different from what it means, you know, if your country has an Earth Overshoot Day somewhere in the fall, right? So the level of responsibility, I believe, that, you know, people in countries like the United States have is much higher than many other parts of the world. And so how can we help families become more climate conscious? I'm going to talk about 4 ideas today. They're not the be all and end all of how we can help families engage, but these are the 4 things that I focus on when I work with families and talk with parents in my own personal networks. We can help families cultivate emotional resilience. We can help them to learn about climate change. We can help them learn how to reduce harm and nurture ecological healing, and we can help families engage in conscious activism. So why is cultivating emotional resilience important? I think it's a foundational part of helping families to become more climate conscious, because facing climate change requires that we face really difficult emotions like grief, anxiety, anger, and fear. You know, you've seen the slides showing high levels of distress, and that the more we learn, sometimes the more distressed we become. And this makes a lot of sense, right? We feel these emotions when something that we love is under threat, and that is actually what is happening. So I believe that emotions like anxiety and grief are entirely normal and appropriate responses to what is happening, and we should embrace them, as hard as that may be, and help families to find ways to process them. And being emotionally resilient is a critical skill for individuals and families who want to play a role in the climate movement, because the times ahead will be challenging. They are challenging for families, but cultivating emotional resilience can help us to remember that we can still have joyful and meaningful lives, even within the climate crisis. And so what helps with emotional resilience? And I want to underline that we don't yet have a whole lot of evidence-based interventions for navigating climate distress. And so a lot of these suggestions may evolve over time as clinicians and researchers learn more about what helps. But some of the things that have been named in the literature about what helps with cultivating emotional resilience in the face of climate change are things like validating, normalizing, and empathizing with difficult emotions, like we were just saying. The emotions that we feel, when we learn more about climate change, are entirely normal, and making room for them with empathy is really important. Meaning-focused coping strategies. The idea of meaning-focused coping in the context of climate change comes from the work of a Swedish researcher named Maria Ohala. And meaning-focused coping involves honestly and realistically assessing a situation that may be very difficult, in this case, the reality of climate change, but then looking to your own values and beliefs and inner resources and strengths to see, what the silver linings might be, not in a sense of, bypassing the difficulties of it, but seeing, how can I show up the way I want to be in this circumstance? How can rising to the challenge of climate change help me to become the kind of person that I want to be and live a meaningful life? A sense of community and belonging is really important. In the literature that I've seen about parents and families and climate change, some parents draw on a sense of spiritual perspective or a sense of their own ancestral resilience to find strength in facing the climate crisis. It's really important for parents and families to have spaces to feel and reflect on difficult climate emotions. And some of the spaces that are emerging to provide that space are things like climate cafes and groups like the Good Grief Network, which are spaces that are designed just for people to have room to process their feelings and emotions about climate change. Time in nature can be healing. And engaging in collective climate action is also really important. So one of the studies that I have seen and loved was done by researchers at Yale who were looking at college students experiencing climate anxiety, and they found that engaging in collective action with other people, helped to reduce depression symptoms for people who were facing climate anxiety, and that individual action did not have that same effect. So engaging in collective action with other people is not only good for the planet, it's also good for our mental health. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Learning about climate change is, of course, part of what it means for families to become more climate conscious. And I want to highlight that how we learn about it is really important. So climate change is directly connected to all of the other social justice issues we're facing today. Racism, wealth and income disparities, gender inequality, all of the issues are intersecting with climate change. And so, when we're learning about climate change, it's important to learn about it from the lens of climate justice so that we have a sense of who's going to be most impacted by climate change and how we can center their needs. Learning about climate change for families also means learning about disaster resilience. And this can be difficult to learn about. And I want to underline too that disaster preparedness should never be an individual responsibility, right? This is really something that governments, country governments, state and local governments need to be in charge of. But at the same time, there are things that individual families can do to stay as safe as possible And when we're working with families, helping to make sure that they know what they can do to be prepared for the disasters that might affect their areas is really important. I've included a couple of links here for US-based websites that can help families prepare for natural disasters, or unnatural disasters, as we may think of them in the context of climate change. But there are resources all around the world for families on this front. And here's just one diagram from the National Center of Disaster Preparedness in the US with questions that families can ask themselves to find out whether they're prepared for the disasters that might affect their area. And this is focused on the US, and I think what's true about the US and many parts of the world is that every area has its own unique threats, right? So I live in North Carolina, where the main threats that we face are hurricanes and heat waves, and sometimes flooding, not so much wildfires, right? So in California, parts of the west coast of the US, on the other hand, wildfires are the primary threat. So understanding the unique risks of your geographic area is really important, and making sure that the families in your life are aware and as prepared as they can be is really important. Another thing that we can do to help families become more climate conscious is to gently introduce habit changes and lifestyle changes that can help reduce our overall environmental impact and contribute to ecological healing. And of course, the changes that we make are going to depend, again, on how many resources we're taking up in the first place. So thinking back to that diagram showing the Earth overshoot days for various countries. The diagram you see, or the image you see on the right here, is from the UN Act Now campaign with ideas that families can take to minimize the effects of climate change. And these are things that families can do at home, like saving energy, using active forms of transportation like walking or biking, eating more vegetables, reusing rather than continuing to just buy. That's very much a part of American culture, to just keep buying. And all of these actions have benefits beyond helping the earth, right? They can help us to remember our values and who we really want to be. They can help us to help our children adapt to living more lightly on the earth and develop those habits from a young age. And there's also profound mental and physical health benefits from some of these changes as well. I love this diagram from the British Medical Journal that shows some of the health benefits of making changes that are good for the climate. So just as one example here, active transport, and of course that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, because there's, if we're riding our bikes or walking, there's fewer vehicles on the road. But that's also good for our mental health, to get time outside and exercising. It's good for our cardiovascular health and reducing overall rates of chronic disease. So almost all of the changes that we make for the sake of the earth can benefit our physical and mental health as well. And engaging in conscious activism for families, I think, is also a really important part of helping families to become more climate conscious. And so individual change and system change are both necessary for addressing the climate crisis. And unfortunately, they often get pitted against each other, but we really need both. And the way I think of it is that when I'm working with a parent or a family who's trying to be more climate aware, I encourage them to start in their own homes, but then think of that as training for taking bigger actions that have broader impact. But it's also important to recognize that, many families are busy and overwhelmed, and activism, it doesn't have to be big or heroic to be meaningful. Every little step that we take matters, and it counts, and it's helping us to practice becoming engaged in climate action. And when we do activism in a way that taps into our own unique gifts, strengths, and resources, it can become meaningful, even joyful, and it can be a lot of fun. I want to share some ideas for what activism might look like for families. And to frame this, I'm sharing an amazing diagram from a researcher named Elise Amel that she sort of mapped out this idea of spheres of influence. So, we may think that as individuals, we can't have much of an impact, but I don't think anything could be further from the truth. This diagram maps out all of the levels of influence that just one person can have, right? Because of the ways that we are connected to different social networks and idea networks. And so Some of the ways that families and parents can engage in climate action are talking about climate change with our loved ones, our neighbors, our community networks. So thinking about disaster preparedness, just as an example, talking to your neighbors to make sure that they have a hurricane emergency kit or a wildfire go bag. That's a form of climate action. Using our money to donate to climate justice organizations is a great way to begin to have a wider impact. Voting for pro-environmental candidates and encouraging others to vote is something that all of us can and should be doing. And that's something that kids can engage in too, even if they aren't old enough to vote. I remember when my kids were very young, one of the first sort of forms of climate activism I was intentionally engaged in was writing postcards to voters in the US to encourage them to get out to vote. And my kids from about the age of 3 could put the stamps on the postcards and loved it. It was just like stickers for them. So getting kids involved in many of these actions is possible from a young age, and kids love to help. We can engage our schools, our workplaces, and community organizations in climate action. Another example from my own family is that my parents have been working with their church to get their church to begin composting, right? So that's an example of how individuals can begin to affect these community organizations that we're a part of. We can advocate for climate-friendly policies at the local, state, and federal government level. And if you're really ambitious, you can run for public office. I think we definitely need more people who care about families, especially families with young children, in public office. Creating art that helps to change social norms is another really powerful way to engage in becoming more climate conscious. So many other ways that families can engage in climate activism. And I'm sharing a few images from my own family. These are my kids. They love art, and they've really enjoyed making climate protest signs and sometimes walking them around our neighborhood. So making it fun for kids is a great way to encourage kids to get involved in climate action. And I would highly recommend, if you've got families in your life who are wanting to get more involved in climate change, to find ways to get kids involved as young as possible that are fun and empowering and engaging for them as well. I want to close by sharing some further resources. You'll see on the left side a list of books. There are so many amazing climate books. So this is just the very tip of the iceberg of books that I think will be useful for families. On the right-hand side is a list of family-focused climate groups. The two on the top, Parents for Future and Our Kids Climate, have an international network of groups. So no matter where you are in the world, if you go to one of those websites, you'll find a family-focused climate group somewhere near you. Moms Clean Air Force is my own organization. I hope you'll visit momscleanairforce.org and check out the work that we are doing. And finally, some resources for emotional resilience include climate cafes. Climate cafes are happening all over the world more and more. It's an emerging movement, and you can go to this website to find out if any are happening near you, or to find out more information about how you might start your own climate cafe. And the Good Grief Network as well is an amazing organization that is leading groups to help people cultivate emotional resilience and process the really difficult feelings that climate change can bring up. And they regularly run groups that are focused on supporting parents. So I hope that you'll check them out as well. And finally, to close, if you want to email me again, my email address is ebashard@momscleanairforce.org. I hope that you will reach out if you have questions or want to connect. I'd love to connect with you, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Accept our congratulations for the job you are doing for the approach through motherhood in your initiative. It was very enlightening to listen to what you have been doing. Unfortunately, Elizabeth was not here, but you can always ask questions via mail. Climate change-related uncertainty is shaping parents' decisions around the globe. The change not assess them now. Allow me to introduce Carlos Muñoz Pina, Director for Research and Data Integrity from the World Resources Institute. He will elaborate on the intersection of environment and human development. Remember that we have now, we may ask questions, and we have like approximately 45 minutes to continue with our comments and in the advocacy plan. So, Carlos, are you ready? There you go. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Okay, buenos días a todo el mundo. Thank you for being here. Thank you especially to Universidad Panamericana for the invitation to speak today. Well, I will be focusing on families, energy, and climate change. And I will switch over here so you can see me better while I'll begin to work on the topics. And what we have here is 3 dimensions that I think are very important. The first one is that households are the main consumers of, one of the main consumers of energy in our economies. So houses, buildings, transport to school, all those things require energy. And it's also direct and indirect emissions, because by purchasing things, eventually you're purchasing the energy needed to move them. The second point is that energy savings, all that can be brought by new technologies or new practices, would help or can help improve the budget of the families. They would spend less on energy, they would save more and be more productive. And that, in aggregate, helps the entire economy and reduces the global footprint of households, of families. And it's very important to take into account that they are different to firms. Firms have access to credit more readily, have specialized people dealing with energy and savings, and households, they're, well, just like us, practicing getting things together, agreeing and moving forward. Now, the fourth point is that families can contribute to reduce climate change, to reduce emissions, but they also will be suffering the impact of whatever climate change is not stopped. Whatever is left, the effects of being below 2 degrees centigrade of global warming, or going beyond that, these families will have an impact. And we will look at best practices regarding that. So my next slide, it's about 3 papers that we have at WRI. This paper is by a team in India that went over and decided to ask, what does it take for a family to install solar panels? And to install solar panels in India, where you have an unequal distribution of income and you have lower incomes on average, what does it take for a family to install rooftop panels? And India is very ambitious. The goal of achieving 20 gigawatts of installed rooftop solar is in the horizon. And in 2018, they had 1.2 gigawatts. Now in 2022, this has risen to 7.6, so we're there on the way there, but the movement was very slow. So this team went in and began to ask people, why did you install solar panels? Why not? What is the barrier? Why are you reluctant to do so? And the argument was that in this case, if you're just connecting to the grid, just to the line, a power plant connected to the city, you just have to hook up and the household is in. But with a rooftop panel, you need to have participation. You need household to say, yes, I will buy it. Yes, I will install it. Yes, I will give it maintenance. They have to be active participants. And the government of India launched a very large subsidy program. Their utilities, their electricity generation is in a dire strait. So having the new installed capacity being in the roof of the people's houses was a very attractive proposition. So you have there, and you had a very slow movement at the beginning. And then the team went in and began to ask directly. They asked nearly 2,000 households, 2,000 families in 2018. And what they found out, this is, by the way, you can reach it, is by Devi, my colleagues, Mala Devi, Uttara Narayan, and Tirkandal Mandal. And they asked people, why did you install? And the main barriers, the 3 takeaways, were that there was a problem of information. When people were asked, do you know about solar panels? Do you know what could be generated with this? People said, I really don't know. And one of the main reasons for not installing was that people didn't know. They got information from vendors, from government sites, but the people they trust to give them real information are their own families, their neighbors, the people that have installed previously and say, yes, this works. And information was flowing through the commercial and government sites and not through the social network that people used to take into account. The second one was that financing was complicated. In some places, the tariff structure was electricity from the grid was subsidized. Well, it wasn't worth it. Just like in Mexico, if you are paying less than, let's say, 5,000 pesos per bimester of electricity, then you won't have a solar panel that is profitable in the long term. You basically are being subsidized in your electricity consumption, and you're better off connected to the grid as a family, as a household, but not as a country, because solar energy is cheaper than most of the fossil fuel generation now. So the other problem was, for some families, the tariff structure didn't make it profitable to install. And for others, the collateral, the kind of things you have to put in to get a loan to install the panels, was too high, something they were not accustomed. If they were used to buy refrigerators or air conditionings, this was way off what a normal family would be experiencing. So information, financing was the second problem, and then the third one was institutions. And a good way to illustrate it is our team found in Chennai that the utility, the the electricity commission delivering to the houses said, no, if you install solar panels, then I won't be selling electricity and I would be at fault. So they were opposed interests from a government firm selling electricity or a utility. In other places, in Chandangrian, the architecture regulation was a problem. The rooftops could not be altered or could not be intervened with solar panels. And I don't mean that if you have a historical building, you have to put ugly solar panels on top but we have been seeing this movement about integrating solar panels into the architecture. Now we have Vatican City moving into its historical buildings with solar panels that blend in with the architecture, that respect the architecture and still generate and respect Mother Earth at the same time. Now, in general, as many middle and lower income countries, there was bureaucracy and officials with not enough information. Those three things were the main causes. And look at the results. What we have is the reasons. All the areas in blue and in red are the areas that did not have information enough to decide. So you have between 40 and 70% almost of the households not deciding to put panels because they didn't have the information. And this is 2018. So an effort to provide information through the networks that people trust is one of the lessons there. The second one is that the economics, the area in purple, it's around 20 percentage points. 20% of the people that were not installing solar panels said, it doesn't make economic sense for me. In particular, maybe the collateral was too high, the finance terms or the subsidy didn't make sense. And, well, one question for you when I finish, I'm going to be asking my real world audience here and also the virtual audience is, if you look at this, all the reasons you have there, physical constraints, have heard bad reviews, no value for money, what other reasons would you act upon? How would you transform India's solar rooftop program to make it better? So please take a look at this one. It's going to be an exam for the people at the Universidad Panamericana, but we'll go and what ideas do you have? Okay, so next one is the reason. Now let's look at the economics. Information, economics. Here's the economic story. You have all the 5 cities where we studied this problem, and in the line in purple is the price, the cost of electricity per kilowatt hour. So you see certain cities, Chandagran has a lower price, and you have Nagpur with a higher price. And you see the number of years needed to recover the investment. So the first point is you recover the investment. That's the cool thing first about solar panels. You obtain whatever you invest, you obtain a return and then some more. And that means it is valuable for the household, and it's valuable for the country, and it's valuable for the planet. But even so, look, in some places you recover this after 8 years, 16 years, 10 years, and the higher the price, the faster you recover investment, and it's logical. If it's more expensive with electricity, you are saving with a solar panel more expensive electricity. So between 6 and 8 years. And look at the subsidies that already the Indian government devoted to support solar panels. You see how it shaves off 1 year. So instead of recovering it in 8 years, you recover it in 7 or in 6. You obtain a faster return on investment just thanks to the subsidy. And that would help many families take the step forward for their own budget to save energy and to save energy for the entire grid of their state or their city and contribute to reduce climate change. So remember, families are very important consumers, and families here are making a difference by installing new technologies. Now, this is a second case. We'll be moving from India to the US. And here it's a team by Greg Carlock, Gillian Newberg, Leslie Calle, and Ivana Said. And my 4 colleagues begin to look at the way electricity, energy in the US was being consumed by households. So let's look at how different is this. In their case, they begin to take national statistics and looked at how much did people spend from their own budget. Remember, the first argument was you save energy, you save emissions, and you help planet and the national economy. Well, what percentage of your electricity bill means? What does your electricity bill means with respect to your overall income? So again, for people at the Universidad Panamericana, I will ask to you calculate this number. How much do you spend on electricity each month? And what does it mean from your family's income every month? So get that percentage. And especially you professors are going to be the ones I will be asking first. Here, the definition of a high energy burden is when you spend more than 6% of your income, your monthly income, on energy, on electricity and fuel. And if you spend more than 10% of your income, you're classified as having a severe energy burden. So this team of fantastic researchers went in and began to look at, well, the average 25% of households in the entire US spends more than 6% of their income in electricity, natural gas, and heating bills, in the energy needed for their household. Now, if we look at Black households, this number increased to 36%. That means more than 1/3 of Black households have a high energy burden. We go into Native American and Hispanic, and here we have also 36 and 28%. That means that the energy burden is higher among people of color, among families of color. And this is compared to the white population in the US. Now, regarding the housing, the people that rent, 30% of them have a high energy burden. And the people that own houses, this is around 22%. And among families with low income, almost 2/3 of them are facing a high energy burden. So you have the US, different from India, in a place with overall greater prosperity, but still having the lower income families and the people of color having higher energy burdens. What do we do with that? So this team went in and began to map how did it look. Here you have a map of the US, and each one of them is one county, and you look at the energy burden over there in the graph. The darker the color means that the burden is higher. The share of people with a energy burden, the average burden is higher. And also you have the racial distribution. Why are people of color, why are Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans facing higher energy burden is still not known. It might be because they are renting houses and they have little to say in what is invested in the house. The house might be losing energy because it has just not weatherized. It has very little defenses against the external environment. But it's not invested in enough in that. Is there racism in the word sidelining, access to programs? There's a confluence of factors, but this is the picture. This is the current reality. The weight is heavier on different households depending on their status, income, housing. And well, what is the government of the US doing around it? And there are three things that the programs that the team studied. The first one is the weatherization of homes, the way you make your house better to withstand cold temperatures if you're in the north, or hot temperatures if you're in the south. And also helping with energy efficiency. These investments that we mentioned that they were lacking, helping, subsidizing, providing loans, guarantees, etc., to invest in those things that would save energy for the household and for the economy and reduce overall emissions. And then the same thing as in India, installing solar panels, tax credits, and subsidies to get there. In this case, grids are working, almost everyone is connected, but the idea is to begin to make the switch. So look at the parallels. Families in very different geographies, in very different places, facing similar challenges. And what we have, programs like this, the weatherization assistance programs, the non-business energy property tax credit, single-family housing repair loans and grants programs. There are many different programs with names that need to be accessed to help people to get there, families to get there. There are two great targeting and outreach tools, ways in which you can get in and find out where are those communities, like in the map we just showed. And one of them is the environmental justice screening and mapping tool. It looks at access to resources and where is the greatest need, and you can pinpoint them out. And the Department of Energy also has an energy justice dashboard. These are tools to find out where are people, if you have a limited amount of subsidies, where do you put it to make the greatest impact in terms of equity and in terms of environmental issues, environmental improvements. Now, with the current administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, you will have these same programs and more boosted to get to more families and begin to save energy, budget, and now let's take 5 more minutes to look at the other side of climate change. We see families in India and the US able to contribute to reduce climate change impact. And that's a good way to channel because it's real decisions, hard decisions, because if you invest in something, energy efficiency, weatherization, or solar panels, that means you're devoting budget to that and not to other things. The real balance, the day-to-day balance needs to be achieved to get families moving. But, well, what about climate resilience? We know that there are things that nature can help us to deal with climate change. And one of them is watersheds. If you protect watersheds, you are protecting the water that reaches the families, the communities. If you increase tree cover and green space in cities, then you can provide more shade and reduce the impact of heat islands. So the impact of heat, the impact of having less water, and the impact of storms, protecting mangroves and reefs can reduce coastal flood risk against the 3 impacts: heat, lack of water, and in catastrophic risky events. You can have nature help you there. But you need to invest in nature. You need to protect nature to help protect the communities. Well, nature-based solutions also have families in their midst. And in Mexico, the WRI is collaborating with 3 projects I like. Now, they're still not publications like the other 2, which you can reach in our website, but they will be future publications because we're working with, we're finding what works, what doesn't, what drives families to participate, and what drives families to be there for their community. And remember, even if it's today's climate, the current climate causing the storm, or the first signals of the new climate, a more harsher environmental, more a climate that changed, the current climate or the future climate making its first appearances, there is risk. There's natural disasters that we need to get involved and support families, communities and the local governments there. The three things and the three exciting projects that I recommend you to follow up as we advance this year and next year are first restoring mangroves in the Yucatan Peninsula. Here, it's working with communities where mangroves were lost to, illegal deforestation, to expansion of urban areas. Losing mangroves meant losing the protection from storms. So in the Yucatan Peninsula, participation with communities, families joining the restoration program, getting skills in that, is one of those projects that's being launched. The second one is in Cintalapa, in Chiapas, where landslides after big storms caused families to lose what little they had. The investment in their land got eroded, houses were broken down. So how do we improve resilience to storms? Here, WRI is working also with partners to plan to be prepared for disasters. And being prepared makes a difference between losing your assets, losing health, losing lives, and just receiving the impact, but being resilient to the impact. And there, one of the ideas is an early alert system, land restoration and land zoning, saying this is an area of too much risk, should be devoted to nature, let nature occupy space, and people move their dwellings and their economic activities elsewhere. Or restore land, regrow forests there. And having an alert system means a way in which the signal storm is coming, landslides might happen here, here, and there, and then you begin to get families helping other families being resilient, move away, move fast, find refuge there. So these three things are there. The maps are being generated. Where are those areas? But then you would need the investment and the action. And the third one is working with Monterrey and Naucalpan, precisely in cities that grew too fast and forgot about their trees, to get more trees there to avoid impacts of heat. Heat that can be, especially like the weeks we have experienced recently, that can be damaging to health, children going to school, families enjoying outdoor activities, or just being inside. This idea of having a shaded city with more forest can help protect them. So, and it's open to other cities. 3 good ideas, 3 good practices that can work, and we'll keep you posted on as we begin to find out, like in the case of India and like in the case in the US, what are the patterns? Who participates, who doesn't? What community gets in forward? What makes this work? And this is where we call upon you. We need to find out what works to make it work more. With this, I will finish and be open to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Carlos, for this presentation, which I think it was very enriching for everyone. Yes, I encourage you to ask questions either in Zoom or here in the room, and also answer the question, because he said he was going to ask questions about solar system, right? So I hope you have reached your parents.
And if you can project this last slide that I have there, that's the questionnaire. No, so energy burden. So please raise your hands here who spends more than, my screen, I need to share it, but raise your hand who has more than 6% of their monthly income, their monthly budget in electricity. Here, more than 6% too, okay. Now, have you installed solar panels? One, yes, the other professor, no, we need to move this professor into that because it's profitable.
I can say something. Before in my house, we paid 480 pesos. I mean, 4,080 pesos for electricity, and now we have solar system, and it's like 150 pesos. So it's awesome. So please change.
Yes,
now.
That makes sense. And in Mexico, especially, I would say that one of the problems is that. Okay, I think we are here. Yes, this is where you would find the papers we said, the working papers we were talking about, and the other projects in Mexico working. So please access them. Papers are really rich, and then you'll find the analysis. So we have here 2 examples, both of them. And in Mexico, the way the tariffs are structured are the larger the houses, the more consumption, you pass into the highest tariff, and then it becomes profitable to have solar panels. So what do we need? In this case of the Universidad Panamericana, just double the amount of professors having solar panels in their houses, and we'll get there. Get them a financial plan, and sure, it will work. But now, for the rest, no, you're not spending more than 6%. Now, my second question was regarding this other slide. Please keep this in mind, where you will get, is what would you do in India, where our team found that these are the reasons for not, yes. Oh, okay, can we hear about them? Okay, sure. So on to you. While the audience here begins to answer what would you do here. Okay, I'm listening.
I don't see any hands. Victor Molnar, do you have any question? There we go.
I'm sorry, my question was mainly for, he asked if we pay more than 5%, and I thought Zoom chat was also asked to raise our hand if we do. So that was
okay. Thank you very much, Victor.
Okay.
I think Federico Daniel is raising his hand. Could you please open your microphone and introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, hi, I'm Federico Chamas. I'm an alumni from Universidad Panamericana. And my question is, how do we implement these climate change solutions in Mexico when we have politics that don't actually like these kind of solutions because of the Reforma Energética, because of the way our electric system works? So how do we change this perception of how solar panels work and how they can help us?
Okay, my answer there would be in layers. First, there are things you can still do. There are things you can invest currently in installing solar panels in your own home, start to get the grid going, and work with schools, institutions, and organizations to have solar panels there. So you can do some things now with the current regulation. But also, if you want to change regulation, you want to make it more open, you have to look at where are your allies. And the first one is many local governments, many state governments are climate progressive. So working with those to move forward the agenda is also important. And the third one, as we saw just in the Moms Clean Air Force, the argument of having a dialogue with your representatives to help them move towards supporting climate progressive ideas is there. So you see the embedding, families doing, supporting organizations, local governments, and the national governments. That is the way to be moving. And certainly, if rules now are not supportive of having more clean energy in the grid in the national level, maybe you can have decentralized energy begin to move forward and use that examples by saying, if we move this way, my city, my state, my country can move there together. So the answer is keep on working, having a dialogue with all different spheres, local action, and local dialogue, and that would get things moving, Federico. Thank you for your question. 5 minutes. Yes?
Please stand up here so you can listen.
Hello, thank you for the talk. It was so great. I have a question about blockchain technology. Okay, let me know. Okay, here is it. Would there be any way to use these new technologies as blockchain technology or NFTs to help to reduce the energy used by those ones, or to help another industry to reduce, I don't know, the energy consumption?
Interesting, because for energy, I would say there are two basic steps. You need to get the technology out there. You need to generate it, invest in knowledge, science, technology to get it out there. But once you get it there, you need to have someone to adopt it. You need to have a firm or household getting in there. And that's where you need the green finance to move that forward. So I would say the combination means all new technologies are bets, and you need to have long-term bets. So you need to have investment to be able to cover those 5, 6, 7 years, let's say, but also a way to handle risk. If it's too experimental, it doesn't work, how do you deal with things happening and it not working as you expected? So green finance and covering the risk are the two elements you need to adopt. Now, technology, I say it's like competition. Let all technologies compete and see which one advances. But what we heard from the case in India is that you learn not only as a household, but you learn through your community, sharing information, what works, what doesn't, and doing. So what Federico was asking, if we want to start, well, the best idea is to generate networks to begin to move forward in installing those. So I would say, yes, give it a try and tell us about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 minutes more.
Do you have any other question? There's a question in Zoom, no? Here? Well, I myself have another question. Do you have any Mexican statistics about solar energy?
Yes, there are statistics. You can visit our site for the latest ones there. And I would say that solar in Mexico is growing fast in two different areas. Well, I would say 3 different areas. First is when the first, second, and third subastas eléctricas, the idea of the procurement to get to say the National Electricity Commission electricity, they were successful. Solar energy in large plants or large systems, large generators, worked, and it's generating some of the cheapest electricity in Mexico there. So we have CFE purchasing electricity from those suppliers that and whose contracts are still valid that were done over, let's say, over the previous 6 years. Now, households are investing in 2 ways. One of them are very rich households that are paying the highest electricity prices and have no subsidy. And that is between 3 and 4%. The 3 or 4% richest households in Mexico pay the highest amount of electricity and receive no subsidy. Mm-hmm. Those households are beginning to install solar panels very fast, and we're not worried about that, only information to get them moving, because the economics, there are families that have enough wealth to ask for a credit that would be paid in 6 and 8 years. So that way the market would move by itself, and hopefully they move fast enough. The other sector are households that are far away from the grid. And here there's something in the rules in Mexico that is helping them. Every time the system of electricity works, there's a little bit of money from that, a small share, that goes to support extending the grid, giving electricity to households that do not have the grid current. So there, what we expect is we're seeing solar panels emerging in communities that are so isolated, too far away from the grid, that they would need to wait 4, 5, 10 years to get the grid there. So we are saving time, we're advancing getting electricity there through the deployment of solar energy. So the programs to get there, the investment to do there is part of the government funding now. It's well established for over, I would say 7, 8 years since the rules were changed for it to work, and they will keep on expanding. So if you know a community that's do not has access to electricity, help them apply for the Protease funds to get them going. Those are the 3 things going, and we're still, in percentage terms, less than 10% of the energy is coming from solar panels, and we hope that if rules change, if there's more access at the national level and the individual level, we'll move past that threshold.
Perfect.
I think we're out of time. And so, well, the rest of the questions, please send them to my email. This was part of exam, but hopefully you'll go and check our resources. Remember WRI.org resources, and then you'll find research going on and the initiatives moving forward. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Now it's my pleasure to move on to the most interactive part of our workshop. As you know, the 0 draft of the Advocacy Plan on Climate Change in Families has been available for inputs from the very beginning of the day. We will now allow 15 more minutes to fill in the gaps in case you still have not suggested to make it to the 0 draft. So we have 15 minutes, and then we are going to have Kun to help us understanding it.
suddenly appeared before me, the only one my arms would ever hold. I heard somebody whisper, please adore me. And when I looked, the moon had turned to gold blue moon. I am no longer alone, without a dream in my heart, without a love of my own, without a love of my own.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
escorregava um brilho no seu olhar na beira do mar, navegava nos seus olhos quando a lua me excitou. Peguei um voo, fui no planeta Vênus, no seu momento pleno. Eu te amei assim num sonho, como na realidade, e vibrei meu pensamento. Tô com saudades, baby, tô com saudades. Flutuava nas estrelas numa noite de luar, escorregava um brilho o seu olhar, baby, na beira do mar, navegava nos seus olhos quando a lua me excitou. Peguei um voo, fui no planeta Vênus, no seu momento pleno. Eu te amei assim num sonho, como na realidade, e vibrei meu pensamento. Tô com saudades, eu tô com saudades, tô com saudades, baby, saudades, tô com saudades, baby, eu tô com saudades, tô com saudades, baby, tô com saudades. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing is gonna be alright. Singing, don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing is gonna be alright. Rise up this morning, smile with the rising sun. 3 little birds pitched by my toaster, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true, saying, this is my message to you. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing is gonna be alright.
Thank you. Allow me now to introduce Koen Vermeij from Netherlands, who has shaped the zero draft with the collaboration of Che van den Driesch from the Netherlands as well, and Janet Vega from Mexico.
Thank you very much. Is my screen sharing now?
We cannot see it
Okay, let me see.
yet. You may share your screen so everybody can.
Let me see. No, I don't know how it works to share my screen.
Don't you worry. Do you want us to share the advocacy plan for you?
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we'll do it in a second.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, firstly, for all the contributions that you've made to the advocacy plan. All through the day, I've been reading your propositions, and there were a lot of them. And I hope I've covered all your opinions on it. So I will just walk you through the advocacy plan step by step. Maybe raise any concerns you still have, things you'd like to add, and then we'll conclude on a definitive advocacy plan. So I'll just start by reading the document, and any questions that I still have, I'll ask you. So the first measurable objectives is the average rise in the global temperature has to be limited to a maximum of 2 degrees and preferably 1.5 degrees. In order to achieve this goal, greenhouse gas emissions such as carbon have to be reduced dramatically. This reduction of greenhouse gas emissions has to be met with the realization of cost-effective alternative sources of energy. And then August added like nuclear power. And I was hesitant to add it in the final advocacy plan because it's still such a controversial topic. For instance, now in the European Union, Germany and France are still discussing with each other whether or not they should see nuclear power as a renewable energy. So August, maybe if you could comment on it and maybe ask whether or not you think it's too controversial to add it in the advocacy plan. Doesn't seem like August is here. August Weber, are you still here in the meeting?
Do you want to say something about what you have just written, August? Well, we may go on, and if he has, oh, there you go.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, great. So my question to you, August, is you added nuclear power as a source of renewable energy. And I'm hesitant to add it because it's still such a controversial topic.
Yes, I know. I understand. Certainly now in Ukraine as well, it can be very dangerous. But as in stable regimes, I think it's quite how to say. It's for the climate. It's not like dangerous or something. If it's not misuse, of course.
Yeah, of course, and that's what the discussion is about. But since the discussion still hasn't been finalized and there isn't any consensus on the topic, I think we shouldn't add it because it makes the document too controversial. If you agree with me.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, you're right.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll continue. So the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions has to be met with the realization of cost-effective alternative sources of energy to compensate for the breakdown of fossil fuels. States and international organizations should invest more in scientific research in order to reduce the cost of renewable energy. Financial incentives should be offered to companies that decide to use green energy sources, and subsequently companies that emit a lot should be taxed for it. Furthermore, several consequences of climate change are already taking place, both in the environmental and human rights sector. Therefore, both the developing and the developed states should be invested in the defense against these consequences. And lastly, globalization, leading to the growth of the world economy and increasingly international lifestyles, contributes to the producing and consuming less locally. Since world trade is one of the major polluters, therefore establishing import and export control measures could encourage more local production and consumption. And then we have one proposition by Victoria. Let me read it real quick. Change and sustainable development. Yeah, it's about developing new technologies to reduce energy consumption, but I think we've covered that already enough, and otherwise the text is going to be really long. It has to be an advocacy plan, and an advocacy plan has to be short and to the point. So if there are no objections, I propose we remove this from the advocacy plan. Okay, I think there are no objections. So that was the first part, the measurable objectives. Are there any points that anyone would like to raise on this part of the advocacy plan?
Hello, sorry. It's the thing is that I used to research a lot about that, and
yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, I used to reach that the blockchain is also. Okay. Sorry, I'm Victoria. I used to comment. Yes. Well, I researched a lot about that, and I find out that the blockchain technology is using from promoting to the recycling. One example is the plastic platform in Barcelona that is based in Nasoma. Plastic use blockchain for transactions between waste managers and recyclers, also buyers and recycling plastic around the world. So that's why I think that it could be useful.
Okay. Let me see where we can edit. So maybe we can edit in this part of the text where it says that the reduction of greenhouse gases has to be met with the realization of cost-effective alternative source of energy to compensate for the breakdown of fossil fuels. And maybe we can formulate some to-the-point sentence that captures your point well enough. Can you propose something we can add to this part of the text?
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, my question was whether or not you can propose a short sentence that we can add in this part of the text that covers your point.
We're just thinking about how to reduce it. She will write it down. I don't know if you would like to go on, and then we come back to this point.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so then we go to the second point, which is defining messages points. I'll read it. We're beginning to see the start of the effects of the rise of global temperature already, for instance, by an increase in floods, heat waves, and droughts. Furthermore, climate change is a threat to the entire planet, not just specific parts. However, areas of poverty will be hit harder by the consequences of climate change. And above all, children will be the ones that will have to deal with the consequences. I'll remove this because it's okay. Everything we fail to act on now will be a problem our children will have to cope with in the future. And all the consequences of climate change that we are already seeing affect children the most. Climate change can still be slowed down. It is not too late to act, but if we fail to take adequate measures now, there will be a point where it is too late. These measures must be national, regional, and individual in order to have a rapid and measurable impact. Individual responsibility, however, individual responsibility is still required, but is not sufficient to slow down the process. Solidarity among nations is necessary to achieve the established objectives. As a global family, we need to use universal responsibility to mitigate the negative effects of our actions on the environment. Therefore, innovation with renewable energy must be a central agenda point to achieve structural and sustainable changes. Civil society, governments, and international institutions can play an important role in human development by creating environmental policies in which families thrive. Human creativity is the driver behind policies that will sustain the world for future generations. So that was the second point of our advocacy plan. Are there any objections or propositions that anyone would like to make before we finish this part? I'll give you a second to think about it because it's a big text.
I guess we can go on.
Yeah, I think too. Yeah, so the third point is the communication activities to deliver those messages. And it goes, a cultural shift has to be developed around the topic of climate change, where certain concepts and ideas surrounding it become so much integrated in our vocabulary that the measures to combat it no longer seem controversial or debatable. All available media can and should be used to spread this message. In order to achieve decisive political action, the majority of citizens across the globe should feel the importance of those actions. In particular, political figures who are directly responsible to implement measures to achieve the formulated objectives could be used to spread awareness via speeches, social media, and performance in popular media. Also, other important cultural figures could contribute in the same way in spreading this message. And lastly, children and youth should receive climate change education, awareness raising, and training. This can be achieved by including green studies to the elementary, middle, and high school curriculum. In general, people should be motivated through education about what they can do with their families in daily life to contribute to reducing climate change. Also, the youth should be encouraged to become politically and socially active, for instance, by participating in political groups and NGOs. And then August added a remark about not creating doom scenarios so that we still are able to motivate young people in general and all citizens, young people in particular and all citizens in general. And I think we've covered that by emphasizing that they should be motivated through education. So I propose that we leave it at that. Do you agree, August? Because I saw your earlier remark about avoiding the creation of doom scenarios, and that's why I changed it to motivating through education.
Yes, but motivating it through education can still be teaching of doom scenarios, which can make certainly children afraid, but also for more elderly people, it can demotivate them because they think somehow we are lost anyway. So I think it's important to have this nuance.
Yeah. Let me see. So maybe we can add it here. In order to achieve decisive political action, the majority of citizens across the globe should feel the importance of those actions and have the feeling that the actions they undertake are not in vain. So would you agree on that adage?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Okay. So that was the third part of our advocacy plan. Are there any objections, propositions that anyone would like to make before we finish this part?
I guess we can continue.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the fourth part is about the resources that are necessary. In order to reach large groups of people, the message has to be articulated clearly and precisely. One of the most important resources to achieve the formulated objectives is a clear, consistent, and simple vocabulary that enables policymakers and other cultural figures to communicate the message. This will contribute to the popularization of the message and will take it out of the domain of scientists and specialists and into popular culture. There has to be a lot of advocacy to spread this message. This includes actively approaching people with a large cultural reach to endorse, spread the formulated message, and mobilize policy actors. Individuals can also be facilitated in taking climate-friendly measures, for example, in the field of solar panels. A financial incentive and more information about the installation, maintenance, and benefits of installing solar panels can make a major contribution to removing the objections for installing them. Okay, so that was the fourth part. If there aren't any objections or propositions, we can move on to the fifth part. Okay. So the fifth part is about establishing a timeline and responsible party for each activity. It goes as follows. Given the overwhelming scientific evidence surrounding climate change and the disastrous consequences of inaction, all that can be done to prevent it has to be done, preferably today than tomorrow. It remains difficult to establish a concrete timeline to achieve the formulated goals, since this is a global problem and so many different parties are involved in fixing it. However, international organizations can play a big role in facilitating the spreading of this message by contributing to improving the way in which the message is formulated and by continuously approaching and facilitating all the aforementioned actors that can play a role in spreading the message. So again, if anyone has any propositions or objections, you can share them. And if not, we'll go on to the last part of the advocacy plan. Okay, so the last part is about the evaluation of our objectives, and it goes as follows. The rise of global temperatures is continuously being monitored, just as the carbon levels in the atmosphere and the carbon emissions by large industries. Several international initiatives, such as the Paris Climate Agreement, the Arab Center for Climate Change Policies, and the European Green Deal play a big role in the evaluation of measures aimed at combating climate change. And although it is difficult to adequately measure the success of a chosen method, the principle should be that we better do everything within our power to reach our objectives, even if this means doing more than enough. And that concludes our advocacy plan. I'm really proud of it. I think it's a very good document. And if there are any last objections, propositions that anyone would like to make, this is the time to do it.
I don't know if it's a question or a remark, but I'm trying to figure out where the aspects of human development or human well-being, because the last three speakers have spoken a lot about how taking care of the environment helps the
Christy, I'm
environment
sorry
stay
to
healthy.
interrupt. Could you introduce yourself so we can know who you are and then ask the question again?
Okay, hi, my name is Christy Obuya. I'm from Kenya, and I am a mental health counselor that works in prisons.
Thank you. And your question?
My question, of course, hearing my job description is, I'm just trying to wonder where the well-being aspect of the human well-being aspect comes in especially considering how it has been highlighted by the last three speakers especially. And I feel that the document is very good, very compact, very concrete. However, I feel like there lacks some humaneness, so to speak. And I was just wondering how we can add something about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you for your proposition. I think we can add it in the third bullet, the communication activities, and then specifically in the part that is about the education on climate change and green studies. So maybe we can add at the end around here. How would you formulate it? In the education on climate change on all levels, human well-being, both physically and mentally, has to be taken into account, since it is would you propose adding anything at the end, Christy?
Actually, I had hesitated a bit to ask this question because Victor had brought it up in terms of the aspect of where you added and have the feelings that the actions they undertake are not in vain. And I went back to my short notes that have been taken throughout these sessions, and the main word Elizabeth used was emotional resilience. So I was wondering, rather than making a whole large sentence, that we can just use that word.
Yeah, maybe we can add it here at the end because it's not a very big sentence, so it's okay. In the education on climate change on all levels, human well-being, both physically and mentally, has to be taken in account to guarantee. What was the word again that you used?
Emotional.
Yeah.
Resilience.
Emotional. To guarantee the emotional resilience. To guarantee emotional resilience. Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah.
So do you think that now we've adequately covered this topic?
Yes, I do, because I think that was one thing that stood out to me. I didn't realize how much the family can intertwine with very many aspects of society, especially today, learning about how family and ecology and environment mix. So I just thought that that would have been a nice point or something to bring out. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And then one last point that we still have to touch upon is the sentence that I forgot who it was. Someone there in the room would like to add in the first point about preserving energy.
Hello again, I'm Victoria. I think that we can put it on the about resources in the one of the last paragraphs.
Yeah.
Fourth one.
Okay.
At least we are mentioning like resources and all that things. I think that we can add like sustainable technologies.
Yeah.
It said a financial initiative, sustainable technologies, and more information about the installation, maintenance, and all of that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So a financial incentive, sustainable technologies.
Technologies, yes.
Yeah. More. Oh yeah, but this is about the solar panels in particular. So maybe we can add it in the sentence after that as a last sentence. So then, here. Lastly, sustainable technologies to be developed and promoted.
Yes, I think that we can put like lastly, we need to invest also in sustainable technology. So we should.
Also in sustainable technologies. In order, oh, well, yeah. Maybe we can just add it like this.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I guess we have finished this part.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kun, for this effort of putting everything together and trying to listen to everyone. You have done a great job. Thank you very much. We'll see this last advocacy plan in the site. And before we finish, I would like Ignacio to give us some words.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for your job today, which has been really remarkable. I just wanted to make some very specific points about the outcomes of the workshop. So first, the presentations, in some cases, with or without video, it depends, will be available next week on our website in the same page of the workshop, in the public place of the workshop. So you will be able to reach there the recordings, the presentations, etc. And then those of you who have attended will get an email with a certificate, with a diploma, and then we will explain there a bit more what the procedure will be for presenting these 3 advocacy plans. As you know, we mentioned it the first day, in the World Cities Day in October, the Commission for Social Development in February, and the Commission on Population and Development in April. So if you are interested on that, just make sure that you read that email and you reply to it. Of course, I want to mention above all the 3 coordinators who have really been the authors of the draft document, but also thanks very much to them for all their work. And of course, thanks to all the speakers, Universidad Panamericana, Red de Universidades Anáhuac, and all of you for your contributions. Thank you very much, Claudia.
Thank you. This is the end of our workshop. We would like to appreciate your active participation, and we look forward to seeing you again next year. The advocacy plans will be available in the site, as Ignacio has just said, and we will let you know who, when, and how they are going to be disseminated. Thank you very much for all of the thank you notes in Zoom. Perhaps at the World Cities Day, the Commission on Social Development, and on the Commission of Population at the United Nations. Thank you very much for your active attendance, and see you next year.